Thanks, Edward. So I'm very pleased to welcome today two excellent colleagues and also lucky friends. We have Antje Woman and Claire O'Kane today with us. Antje is a child rights officer with focus on children's work and labor at Terre des Hommes, Germany. And she's also a PhD student at Queen's University of Belfast, working on child participation. And Claire is a child rights practitioner and researcher. She learned about children's rights and participation from organized work for children in India in the 90s. And she haven't stopped. And currently she's one of the main consultants supporting the Dialogue Works and Time to Talk participatory research and advocacy initiatives since 2015. So today I'll let them tell us more about this project called Dialogue Works, and which is looking at anchoring working children's participation in societal and political processes. So with this introduction, Antje, Claire, the floor is
yours. Thanks so much, Olivia, for introducing, and thanks a million for inviting us to presenting our work in this important network here, and for organizing such an interesting research series. So really great to be on board. Claire, anything you want to say before we start?
No, just great to be here. Thanks for the introduction, Olivia.
Okay, great. So we have prepared a short presentation and also some optional questions that we can discuss later on. I will now share my screen. So I hope it works. Do you see the presentation? Great, wonderful. As Olivia has said, we will present, let's say, two projects today. One is Time to Talk, which was the initial project, and then the follow-up project called Dialogue Works. And we will use this session to present the children's rights-based approach to research that we have used and to unpack it practically. So to really show you how we've collected data and what the research component of this project is. To give you an overview, we will start with Time to Talk because it was the initial project, continue with Dialogue Works, and then really share some of the methods and tools used, and present also some of the lessons learned. And we'll show you also how the lessons learned from the first project have then been incorporated in the current Dialogue Works framework. First of all, it's Time to Talk. The idea for this project was born when Olivia and I met at the World Conference on Child Labor in Brazil back in 2013, which is quite a long time ago. And we stayed in touch after the conference, and slowly but steadily we built up the framework of the Time to Talk project, and also managed to secure funds from the German government, from the Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, for the entire project frame, which then lasted until 2019. And we were really lucky to get excellent consultants like Claire O'Kane, Ella Barros, and initially also Nicolas Meslaoui, who then supported the framing of the research. The core objective of this initial project was to enable working children to have their views heard in local to global political processes. And we had a specific focus on the fourth global conference on the sustained eradication of child labor, which took place in November 2017 in Argentina. Just to briefly present how working children have been involved in the Time to Talk framework, we did consultations of more than 1,800 working children aged 5 to 18 years in overall 36 countries. With 52% girls, 48% boys, and they were all involved in very different types of work, from rural to urban settings, including camp settings. And also we had like 19% of them in previously organized surroundings. We did focus group discussions using child-friendly tools, and Claire will later present more how these tools work. We also included collaborative participation of over 200 children aged 9 to 18 years in 17 children advisory committees who were placed in 13 countries that really worked jointly with us in the whole research process. So they pilot tested some of the tools. They supported data collection, but also data analysis. and helped us really understand better working children's own perspective. And then in some countries, children themselves took the initiative and started child-led advocacy activities to share their messages with key decision makers, for instance, in Costa Rica, Guatemala, India, and other countries. This all culminated in the presentation of the main findings in a report, which was then presented in a side event at the 4th Global Conference in Argentina. It was unfortunately not possible to have a children's delegation there, which was the initial goal, but at least we managed to have a side event. And also presenting the findings at the side event was supported by children advisory committees. So we asked them for permission to speak on their behalf, and then went to the conference. We also had the chance to include youth representatives of the Global Child Forum in 2018 in Sweden at a BMZ conference, so the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, on the 30th anniversary of the Child Rights Convention in 2019. And we virtually contributed to the C20 summit in Saudi Arabia, also with youth representatives. So that's really in a nutshell the project. We learned in Time to Talk that children's participation is not a single event, and we can not only share key messages of working children in one event, and that's it. So that was really in the evaluation process of Time to Talk, we really learned that there's a need to institutionalize and normalize working children's participation permanently to really make a change and to really include their views and suggestions sustainably. And also we felt that there's still a need to include working children's own delegations in global events and not speaking on their behalf. So this is why we felt the Time to Talk project was a great success, but we did not fulfill our mission totally. So we continued, we got another funding from the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, and we have started the Dialogue Works project in 2020. It will last for 4 years. And the objective is really to anchor children's participation sustainably in local to global processes. Again, we have a collaboration with 27 children advisory committees in 15 countries. And we have put a stronger focus on child-led advocacy activities in each country. So for instance, an annual national exchange with political decision makers. We have also included the idea of an additional research on a global research question, which is then to be identified by children themselves. But we have not yet started with that component. And we have also plans for a global gathering of working children, which was unfortunately postponed due to COVID-19, but will hopefully take place in 2023 or 24. You see that the research pillar is not that big in Dialogue Works. We still build on the findings from Time to Talk. It's really more about entering into dialogues with decision makers. So we strengthen really local to global advocacy, and we had another global event last week when youth representatives from Zambia and Kenya spoke in a side event of the Special Representative on Violence Against Children in the UN General Assembly. So just briefly unpacking the children's rights-based approach to research we used, because this is a research context here. So we had initial talks with Laura Lundy from Queen's University Belfast when we started, and we chose to apply the children's rights-based approach to research, which includes, for instance, forming groups like the Children Advisory Committees that then support all phases of the research process. We then developed, or our consultants, Claire, Ornella, and Nicolas, then developed a research toolkit, which was pilot tested in India and Nepal. And we trained local research teams that then did the consultations, because we were simply not able to travel to all these 36 countries. So local research teams stayed in continuous exchange with the children advisory committees and working children and did the consultations. And they submitted the findings back to us in reporting templates in 3 languages. These were then coded by our consultants in using the software in vivo and thematic analysis. And we then collaborated with the children organized in these advisory committees again in the analysis. So for instance, when analyzing the reasons and motivations for their work, but also when identifying protection and risk factors that influence positive or negative outcomes of work. And they also shared key findings. Constantly, we also got advice and feedback from an adult advisory committee. Many of you have been part of this group, so thanks again for your valuable support. And we will then disseminated the news and the findings also in child-friendly language in more than 10 languages. From the ethical point of view, we set up a code of conduct for each local research team that was signed by each member. Each team included also a child protection officer to ensure that whenever children disclose sensitive information, that we ensure that there's a case management and sensitive follow-up. And we applied the 9 basic requirements for effective and ethical child participation as a planning tool, and undertook regular trainings for partner organizations and the coordinators of each children advisory committee that were placed at each local NGO. So that's just a very brief overview, and Claire will now give more details on the core consultation tools that we have used.
Thanks, Antje. And again, this can be brief because I know we try and keep most of the time for the discussions, but we really use a lot of kind of visual tools. A lot were in focus group discussions, some where it was like separate female and male discussion and activities, and then they came together in plenary to share their results to see what was similar and different. Some activities were individual, like a day in the life of timeline, both doing a day in a typical day if you go to school and how you kind of how you balance or look at how they spend their time in terms of work and school and other activities, as well as a typical day in a non-school day. The body map was one of the key tools where children worked in kind of gender separate groups to do a big body map and use the body parts as prompts of what they liked and disliked about their work. For example, what they saw that they liked and didn't like when they're working, what responsibilities they had on their shoulders that they liked and didn't like, in their heart, what feelings they had that they liked and they didn't like, what they did with their hands, where they went with their feet. So again, how people communicated with them. So that brought a lot of really concrete on the daily realities. Again, some of the groups did a kind of exploring reasons and motivations for children's work using a why activity. We built upon some earlier work by Bhima Sangha and CWC in India, looking at mapping what work we can and cannot do and what work we can and should do or cannot and should not do. Again, both from male and female perspective and across different age groups. And moving to the next slide, we had an activity around flowers of support, where the children, having looked at the issues, they developed a flower of support with a different petal for whichever group of people they felt they wanted to give message to, and their particular messages for those groups. So there was often petals for parents, for government, for elders, for their peers, for employers, for police. And again, that kind of fed into their own advocacy messages. And then a lot of options to do creative expression, both individually and collectively, through draw and write, through poems, through stories, through drama. And the opportunities for, again, in groups, particularly the CACs, to do a H assessment to give their perspective on what they felt were the strengths and weaknesses of existing laws, policies and approaches to kind of support working children and families and their suggestions to improve them. So these were some of the main tools in the first kind of research aspect. We developed more for our follow-up phases, but again, those are all available on the kind of various websites. Maybe we'll go to the next slide. Again, just trying to capture, there's been, at each phase of the work, we've had internal kind of participatory lessons learned with children, young people, with the NGOs involved. And I think now 2 years ago, there was an external evaluation looking at the work. So today, there was a lot of very interesting kind of positive findings about the benefits of working with children's advisory committees, of using these kind of child-friendly tools, kind of the benefits of using the 9 basic requirements as a planning tool, and the different outcomes on the kind of positive outcomes on children and families, and to a lesser extent, really the changes in the workplace, but some of the changes where children are getting more say in decision making at the family, NGO and kind of local government level. But we just wanted to really focus today on some of the more critical kind of limitations that also then informed the move towards dialogue works, and actually the time to talk extension phase, where we also acted upon some of the limitations of the initial research and some of the critique. So one of the issues was around this work has all been really undertaken in partnership with local NGOs, which has been its great strength because they're really there on an ongoing basis to support working children. But it was also the risk in terms of research of seeing, is it a bias, you know, depending on what perspective NGOs have on children's work and labour, the questions around how that influences the way they share information with children, what information they share, and really even in the prompting questions, the way of asking certain prompting questions that may get more positive or more negative depending on the NGO's own perspective on children's work and labour. So in the Time to Talk extension and the dialogue works, we've really looked at trying to have, again, more improved sampling strategy in terms of reaching both children who are already organised as part of existing working children's movements and non-organised working children, and having a much stronger focus on the preparation with adults to really reflect on their own assumptions, their own personal views and organisational views on childhood, on children's work, children's labour, and to reflect on the kind of power dynamics between adults and children, so that they can then kind of really more explicitly see how that's impacting, and to create a space where children really can more freely express their own views and take those, kind of be listened to. In the initial Time to Talk, again, we were working with 56 NGO partners. So it was kind of challenges in terms of the time and resources for everyone. And it also meant in the initial research, we couldn't give enough focus on these very diverse contexts in terms of the findings to really disaggregate the findings in relation to how different children's experiences are and the types of work and their positive or negative experiences in very diverse contexts. So there was a kind of strategic choice to work with fewer partners, to have more quality communication, and to really be able to support the kind of both the local work, but the description of the local work in relation to that specific context. The need to have more focus on local ownership. Again, I think with the original research, it was because we also wanted to compare data, it was more strict about not adapting tools, whereas in the extension, the dialogue work, there's a lot more scope to adapt and use things differently, and the more focus on the advocacy and the club and the kind of dialogue, which people can do in very different ways. And so an opportunity to both build up and to really work more strategically with a global children's advisory committee that's just beginning to get underway. And again, more opportunities for working children's representatives to come together themselves and directly share experiences once the COVID restrictions once things are safe enough to do so. As Antje mentioned, a big goal had been that working children would directly represent themselves in the Global Child Labour Conference. In the last one in Argentina, it was not the government of Argentina and ILO didn't allow any working children's representatives under the age of 18 on the basis of security reasons. So we just still need more and more advocacy. We're more hopeful this year that working children, again, from the existing movements, from other organizations like the CACs that are part of dialogue work, and other groups can have direct representation to really express their own views and messages. And we're also just in the dialogue works looking at just a broader opportunity for working children to have more ongoing participation, to embed the kind of platforms for participation, whether it's in local governance or linked to existing community-based child protection committees, or in school governance where children are juggling school and work. So we have more, again, practical and strategic focus on analysing entry points for embedding and institutionalising children's participation. Again, with the lessons learned and ongoing identification of the capacity building that children might want, again, to strengthen their confidence, their ability to organise themselves, to advocate effectively, and also the need to really better prepare government duty bearers, other kind of officials or employers to really listen to and take children's views seriously. And the kind of ongoing need to recognise, to do kind of more and more systematic risk assessment with children, with working children, recognising there are some risks associated with their participation, but again, recognising they're the ones who really also can help identify and look at ways to minimise those risks. And this year we've developed a kind of module around self-care, dealing with some of the frustrations children had, particularly around not being able to go to the global conference, and that kind of build up and that hope that they could represent themselves and then not being able to. So looking at, again, whatever the advocacy, how to recognize what you're achieving, but also to kind of not just be so frustrated that you never want to engage in a kind of participatory advocacy or action again. So that works moving forward. And in the interest of time, I think, yeah, we'll stop there. And Olivia, I don't know if we
add,
yeah,
something,
please.
Claire? Just one aspect, because we are a huge network here, and the two implementing organizations involved in Time to Talk and Dialogue Works, Kindernote and Terre des Hommes, really also invite other organizations to join in. I mean, as Claire said, the changes also to a mix of project-funded and self-funded partner organizations. So it's still possible to join Dialogue Works as a self-funded partner organization and be involved in trainings and so on. But it's also very possible to jointly do local to global events, exchanging with political decision makers, preparing for the global conference and so on. So this is also an invitation to all to get in touch with us.
And we have some questions that might be considered when we come to the
Okay.
group work. I don't know, Olivia, if you want us to share those now, or if there's any. We can maybe just raise them now and then see when we're going into groups to look at them. But the next global Child Conference is happening now, kind of very soon, in face-to-face in May. And I think it was kind of suddenly happening sooner than we realized. So we really aware there's kind of time and still travel constraints in terms of the pandemic. So we're just really interested if any of the groups want to really go into how can we best advocate for and support direct representation of working children in the next global conference. And again, any ideas to widen and sustain political spaces for working children based on your experience, including any other ways that research can contribute to this opportunity for children's participation in political process. And then the last question, again, these are all optional when we come to group, but the other is just this, we commented on, you know, where there was the kind of critique of, okay, if we're doing research and advocacy in partnership with NGOs, like how do we minimize bias? And I think that bias is not just to do with NGOs. We see it as, you know, as practitioners, as policymakers, as researchers, whoever we are. So how do we really, again, encourage more reflection on those, on our own, on people's assumptions, in order to, again, have more two big ears ready to listen to working children and to really hear what they're saying, rather than going in with our own perspectives and only wanting to listen to children with what we want to hear. So that was another question that might be considered when we go into groups.
Yes, so first of all, thanks so much for joining. Here is where you can find more information about Dialogue Works. But you can, of course, also just directly get in touch with us, and we're happy to follow up. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Antje and Claire. There's a few comments that are popping in the chat that I'm inviting you to read, because I don't necessarily see questions